Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Ebb and Glow podcast. Today's episode is just me, and it's going to be something a little bit different. So, I always get a lot of feedback from friends and other listeners that say, Jenelle, I love the solo episodes. Like, I kind of like hearing you talk. I like the chit chatting before the episode starts. Like, I like hearing what you have to say. And my response to that is, don't boost my ego. It doesn't need to be boosted anymore. I'm just kidding. So I know I do a lot of heavier topics on this podcast and get into some really deep issues, but I like to keep it light during some episodes as well. So for this episode, I wanted to try something different to see if you guys are interested in it. What I tend to do in my everyday life, I get really caught up down rabbit holes into random blogs and articles and dating advice and everything. I'm a big reader. So I tend to get caught up in very clickbaity articles just to kind of see what the writers say. And sometimes I agree with it, sometimes I don't. But I always find I have like great conversations in my head about these articles. So I figured since I read these articles all the time anyway, I'd love to give you a synopsis of the article and give you kind of my commentary on these articles. So today's episode is all around first dates, red flags, and dating apps. So previous to my relationship, I was on the apps for a few years, and I have stories on stories on stories that maybe I'll tell a few on this episode, but I have lots of tips. And one of my favorite things to do sometimes is listen to my friends go on these dating apps and go on first dates, and especially the start of a relationship. I find it very intriguing. And I love to hear all the stories of first dates, of my friends getting to know people, especially the ones from dating apps, because you don't actually know this person, and just hearing about their journey of getting to know them and kind of the crazy stories that happen on first dates, I always find it extremely fascinating. And on top of that, I find myself giving a lot of dating advice to my friends if they're still like searching and while they're single, if they're starting to talk to someone, and kind of the types of messages to send and how to have confidence when you're dating, that kind of thing. So it's one of my biggest interests and one of the biggest things I tend to talk about with my friends. So I'd love to share it here as well. One of the first articles I was reading was all about dating app red flags. And oh my God, I've had my friends watch me on dating apps before, and I swipe so fast. They always make a joke saying like, Jill, did you even see that person's face? And for me, I always found myself just looking for reasons to swipe left and just say no, no, no. Because some people, or I want to say most people, do not put any effort into their profiles. And for me, it was like reading resumes where I was like, give me a reason to say no to you right now. And I mean, it left me with not many options to choose from, but hey, I would rather a smaller menu anyways. I love this article because a few of them I definitely agreed with. So I can put these actual full articles in the show notes as well. But yeah, so in this article, it gives 20 dating app red flags, but I definitely want to talk about the ones that stood out most for me. So the first one in the article, they say, if they ask you what you're looking for and your answers don't align, that's a dating app red flag. And I found that fascinating because sometimes people think they can change people and change what they want in a relationship, and that's not going to happen. So for instance, if you're going on the dating apps or going on first dates and your intention is to be in a relationship, and you meet someone and you get along with them, and then when you start talking like, oh, like, so what brings you to the dating app? Like, what are you looking for? And their answer is kind of like, oh, I'm just looking for something casual, like just got over a relationship, so I'm not looking for anything serious. That's a dating app red flag, especially if you personally are looking for a relationship. Don't get caught up thinking that you're going to convince this person to want a relationship just because they think you're cute and they like you. It's not going to happen. If your answers don't align of what you want from this experience, then don't waste your time. Another red flag from this article that reminded me of times being on the dating apps was in quotes when they add something to their profile that says like 6'1" because apparently that matters. For me, that screams that they're already mad about something. They're pissed off about being on this dating app. They already hate women because apparently they think height matters. And it's like they're already coming into the dating app with a negative outlook. So for me, again, this would be a red flag for me because right away I'm like, you hate the world or you have confidence issues. And even though if it is a joke, it's just like it puts a bad taste in your mouth. Another red flag on a dating app is when people make a very non-original thing their entire personality. And you would know exactly what I mean. So I actually experienced this. I was at a wedding this weekend, and one of the groomsmen, he was showing us his dating app profile. And I was like, oh my God, you need to be more original. Like, you're giving people nothing with these prompts. And I see this a lot where people will put like, oh, I love The Office, or I can quote The Office all day. And it's like, so can everyone. Like, we all like The Office. Majority of people who like The Office can quote it all day long. So it doesn't make that person very original or interesting. And it also shows that they didn't put any thought into this profile. So are they actually serious about finding someone? The next one, I never ever had this experience, but I feel like depending on the age group that you're swiping on, it happens sometimes. So the red flag is if their bio is, I don't come on here much, so add me on Snap. Ugh. I'm sorry, but I'm 28 years old, and if I meet someone that still uses Snapchat, like, you're too young for me. It's just a completely different generation. And for me, it just shows that, like, you're not taking anything seriously. And if that's what you're looking for, great. But if I was on the dating apps, like, I think I'd be looking for something a little bit more serious. And texting predominantly on Snapchat would not go over well with me. And also the whole I don't come on here much. I remember seeing that a lot when I was on dating apps. And it's like, what? Like, you're not putting any effort into this. Like, if you don't come on here much, then don't come on here at all. That's how I would look at it. Another big one that stood out to me that in my experience, when this happened, nothing ever came out of it, was the red flag of when they follow you on Instagram too soon. Like, I hate that. I have a public profile, so if they found me, they probably would like follow me. But when they ask for your profile before you've even went on a couple dates, it's like they're making judgments based on some photos of you. You know, I've never liked that. And I find talking to my friends that if you guys start adding each other to Instagram and whatnot, you'll never go on the date. It'll just become him reacting to your stories with a fire emoji, like, so bad. And it just becomes kind of a hookup type situation where you guys are both in each other's rosters and it's never going to become a relationship. So yeah, following me on Instagram too soon is definitely a red flag for me. And I don't need another person watching my stories. Like, if you want to hang out with me, just ask me out. That's how I would see it. The other one from this article that I like the most is the having unnaturally hot photos. I don't like, sometimes it's so hard because you want to meet a really good looking person when you're single and when you're dating. But sometimes when their photos are a little too hot, I used to question that. Like, I remember seeing super hot people on dating apps and being like, maybe a little too good to be true. And we've all heard the crazy catfish stories and whatnot. You can always reverse Google image search the photos just to see if it actually is too good to be true. And I found, like, based on where they went to school and their name, I could usually find them on Instagram or LinkedIn or somewhere to actually see if they were legit. And if I couldn't, I just assumed it was a catfish. So if you have unnaturally hot photos, if you're really a good looking person, put some photos of like you with friends too, so they know you're a real person. And then outside of this article, one of the biggest dating app red flags for me was, and this is one of my biggest tips for dating, is when they ask for my phone number before actually meeting. That's an absolute no for me. I remember being on the dating apps, I would never give my number out until it was a successful first date. And if I wanted to go on a second date, then I would exchange numbers. But anytime I ever gave out my number first, it just became a texting relationship where it would be like a pen pal. And I always said, I don't need any more friends. Like, this is not why I'm here. I'm not on this dating app to find friends. So stop texting me. And even my actual friends, I don't want them texting me very much either. So It just drove me nuts. I remember being in, this was like a few years ago, and I remember being in one of these situations where they would just text me and text me and text me all day, and I'd be at work and like my phone would be blowing up with them texting all the time. And like having long conversations, and I'm like, do you have a job? Like, stop talking to me. It used to drive me nuts. So yeah, for me, that was a big red flag. So a tip to get out of that: don't give out your number until after a first successful date. If you want to go out again, then exchange numbers. So the next article is a recent article, and I learned a lot from this for myself. And it's funny, I almost want to ask my own boyfriend some of these questions to learn some more stuff about him. I'm just kidding. I probably know all these answers. So the next article is called 6 Questions to Help You Actually Get to Know Someone on a First Date. I would have loved to have this article when I was going on first dates. Like, these questions are fantastic and tells you a lot about a person. I remember going on first dates and you'd just be like, I don't know, what would you ask? Where do you work? When did you move to Toronto? Or what do you like to do? Like, I don't know. And I find, because all of us, like, I'm no expert on dating, and I found first dates always felt like an interview to me. And because of that, oftentimes you go for drinks to try to get some liquid courage going so things aren't as forced. But I find if I had these 6 questions before a first date, I probably wouldn't have needed that much alcohol to enjoy the date. The first question in this article that they say to ask on a first date is the question, how would you describe your family and friends? Which is fantastic, because usually you kind of ask them questions about themselves, and no one really likes to talk about themselves on the spot. It's like if you're in a job interview and you're like, what's 3 words that you would describe yourself as? Like, boring. Like, no. But it's fun. It's like, how would you describe your friends and family? It's such a different question that kind of sparks them. And people love to talk about the people they love. We all know that you are who you surround yourself with. So basically, how they describe their family and friends says a lot about who they are as a person as well, because they probably have similar qualities and characteristics. The article also says how your date describes those closest to them will give you insight on what they deem important and who they are when they're not on their best behavior. So that says if their friends are outgoing, they probably are as well, or if they're close to their sibling, they most likely see family as a top priority. What I like about this is the few people that they talk about, whether they just group their friends as a group and maybe they talk about their mom or dad or sibling, you'll get a real sense of who they're close to and who they care about the most in their family as well. And if they are really close to their friends and family, and that maybe that's important to you as well, I know it is for me, you'll see a sparkle in their eyes. So that's always a great sign. So the next question in this article to ask on a first date is, what's your dream vacation? What I love about this question is a lot of times, and I found this when I was on the dating apps, is people were so obsessed with where you've traveled, like how traveled you are. And just because someone's traveled to a bunch of places doesn't mean they're that interesting or have a lot to offer. Sometimes it might just mean that you have access to a credit card. Someone else's credit card that pays for everything. I haven't done a ton of traveling, but it doesn't mean I don't have dreams to go places and I haven't thought about it a lot. There was just not financial means to do those types of things. And even talking to some of my friends, like they've wrote off people before who aren't well traveled. And it's like, guys, we're 25, 26, 27, 28 years old. Like, it's kind of weird to be like, not weird, but it's like, don't expect someone to have been traveled all over the world. If they have, great, but maybe they've done a lot of other different things in their life over the past few years that makes them still an interesting person. So the article says, by identifying your partner's ultimate adventure, you'll have a better idea of how open they are to exploring the world and how compatible they are to being part of yours. So for instance, if their version of a dream vacation is a view of the city skyline from a 5-star hotel room, but maybe yours is being in the middle of the woods in Alaska near a campfire, maybe you guys aren't as compatible as you would think. And especially if your idea of a dream vacation they're shocked at or they're not interested at all, maybe take those things into consideration. And it will also give you a lot of insight into how they enjoy their life or prefer to spend their free time. So the next question to ask on a first date is, do you like your job? So the classic question we often ask is, what do you do for work? Which is boring. It doesn't tell anything. This is a great question to ask. When you ask someone what they do for work, they'll just say their title, their company, and it's kind of the end of the conversation. But by asking, do you like your job? You'll get a sense of what they're really passionate about. And that's okay if their 9 to 5 is not something they're passionate about. Maybe their answer is, yeah, I like my job, but I really like what I do when I get home from work, and that's this, this, and this. So you'll get a sense of where their passion is, what their hobbies are, and you'll also gain knowledge, the article says, on your date's drive and passion, but also what their career goals are. And if career aspirations are important to you, then this is the type of question that you'll get a sense from. Another addition to this question is, if you still want to know what they do for work and kind of get a sense and talk about the work a bit, sometimes when I've asked people what they do for work, they'll say their title and company, like I said. But if that still doesn't give me enough of an answer, sometimes I'll say, oh, awesome. What did you do this week at work? So they'll actually have to think about what they did that week, and maybe they'll have a story for you, but you'll get a sense of kind of how they spend their time, because sometimes titles are so overinflated that you still have no idea what they do. The next question in the article, which is a big winner for me, is, what do you like to read? Or as another alternative to really see if they're a reader, because that's important to me, I say, what are you reading now? And right away, if my first date was like, oh, I'm not a big reader, that is a red flag for me. I spend so much time reading. So someone that's not a big reader, that would be close to a deal breaker for me. The article states that asking what they like to read is another way to find out if they're interesting to you or if the two of you are even compatible. And if you guys don't read the same things, like I know me and my boyfriend don't read the same things at all, it'll give you an option to see, based on what they're reading, is that something that you'd be interested in learning about? So maybe this is someone that could teach you a lot. And I know that would be attractive to me. And like the article says, is you'll, again, have a greater scope of their interests, hobbies, and values and how they all compare to your own. So the second last question to ask on a first date is, what do you need most out of your relationships? Whew. I feel like this taps into all of the love languages. So if you're not familiar with those, definitely Google the 5 love languages to understand. By asking someone on a first date, what do you need most out of your relationships? It's not the classic question of, oh, like what happened in your last relationship? Because that can get a bit dramatic and gossipy. But asking them this instead is getting a sense of really what their love languages is. Do they need a lot of compliments? Do they need to spend a lot of time with you? Do gifts really matter to them? So you'll get a sense if what you need from a relationship versus what they need from a relationship is compatible. And last but not least, one of the best questions to ask on a first date is, what makes you happy? And the article states that as an insider tip, the responses to these questions are obviously crucial, but it's more important what their reaction and enthusiasm is in the answer when they're discussing the relationship's interests in life. The article states that you can and probably will be different from every relationship you enter. You'll probably have different interests, like different kinds of music, or argue about which type of food to order on a Friday night. But the one similarity that is important is the outlook on life. So for instance, if you're passionate about your job or feel you're happiest around your family and they light up when they talk about their parents, you're probably on the right track of someone that's really compatible with you. So that article, I actually learned a lot. I think my favorite is probably number 1. How would you describe your family and friends? Because I love hearing people just talk about the people they love in their lives. And then I'll also give you a sense of, when you guys are in a relationship, like how will they talk about you? Like, will they talk about you in a really positive light? So anyone out there who is single and in the dating world, I hope these questions help you spice up the conversation on your next upcoming dates. So the final article I want to read through is called Low-Key First Date Red Flags You Need to Stop Ignoring. This title definitely caught my attention because, as I said before, I've been on a lot of first dates. I could probably have my own movie. And I remember so many red flags I ignored for a multitude of reasons, and it should have just trusted my gut to begin with. The writer starts the article with this paragraph. She says, I'm a huge believer in gut intuition. So when it comes to red flags on a first date, I had no shame in waving my white flag and piecing the fuck out. I thought that was hilarious. And like I said, I felt like I wrote it myself. She says, it's totally normal for people to intentionally be on their best behavior on a first date. Some are so good at faking it, in fact, but if you look close enough, you really can read people fairly easily between the lines. In this article, you got to go into a first date trusting your gut intuition. It is so strong and you need to trust it. And I know every time I didn't trust it, I was wrong. So I definitely should have listened to it to begin with. The first red flag of this article is their cell phone is the third wheel. I've been here before. I've went on a date before where a guy just kept taking phone calls and just like kept leaving the table, taking phone calls and coming back. And ultimately, I felt like I was on the date myself, and I was so annoyed. Not to mention, he looked nothing like his profile. He was much worse looking in person. So, two huge downfalls. So this article states that if someone can't disconnect from their phone for a few measly hours to connect with a human being, there's a real problem here. While there are certain emergency exceptions and fairly minor occurrences that don't automatically need the boot, there just needs to be more attention paid to how often that is happening on a first date. The article states that if your date has even the thought to answer their phone without regard, it is likely a sign of lack of manners, respect, self-control, and awareness. And I completely agree with that. If I was on a date and someone was on their phone the whole time, it would drive me insane. Even when I go out for dinner with friends or like grabbing drinks with friends, if they're on their phone a bunch, like I don't want to be there. Like I can have dinner at home by myself and not be out wasting my time. Especially on a date, if someone's on their phone a lot, you got to think when people are coming on a first date, just like in a first job interview, they are coming with their absolute best foot forward. So if this is what they call their best foot forward, it's only downhill from here, honey. I'm telling you. The next red flag in this article is what they call premature neediness, affection, and infatuation. I found this one really fascinating. I've definitely have had this happen to me before. And yes, it was somewhat annoying and a little concerning, but I didn't think of it as a huge red flag. But now that I've read this article, it's definitely something I will keep in the back of my mind. So what they mean in this article is that it's all okay being on a first date and someone saying they like you and it's clear that they're attracted to you, whatnot. But if you get the feeling that your date is putting all of their eggs in one basket, this article says it's probably your cue to put on the brakes. So basically, they're coming in full force. Like there's no taking it slow with them. So if you feel like there's a lot of like love bombing happening all at once and they're like all in from the moment they meet you, sure, there is some instances where first dates are very romantic, like the movies we watch, but more often than not, it's probably a red flag if they're coming on a little too strong. This article says someone who comes on too strong too soon is a pretty good indicator of carrying unhealthy relationship patterns and unresolved trauma and dysfunction. These people fall into the premature attachment trap who merely crave instant gratification and are not willing to waste any time getting it. Interesting. It also says that these types of people lack the concept of patience, aka taking things slow, and actually have difficulty connecting and committing on a much deeper level. So it might be one of those situations where it all happened really fast and it burned just as quickly. I've had those situations happen to me. The next low-key red flag in this article is all about abusive behavior and the low-key signs. So this is not talking about obvious forms of verbal, physical, or emotional abuse. Obviously, if that happens, that is the ultimate red flag and deal breaker. So get the fuck out of there. But this is referring to low-key abusive behavior, so like the subtle signs. One of the ones that caught my attention the most in this article, and I've seen this in dates before, when your date finds every way to blame others for their own mistakes, excuses, failures, and disappointments, meaning it's always about the waiter, the Uber driver, the weather, the government, his shitty boss, his useless employees, his cell phone, his crappy car, on and on and on and on. What this tells you about a person is he or she lacks personal responsibility and accountability. I've went on dates with these types of people, and my friends have also, and it's just such a cloud of negativity that you do not want to be a part of. If on the first date they're already in a negative headspace and outlook, it's only going to get worse from here. Another low-key abusive behavior that you may see on a first date is the person is a bit controlling and possessive. So, for instance, if they got angry or frustrated with you when you took too long in the bathroom, maybe they refused to let you order or speak to the waiter, they just don't take no well or for an answer. So that's definitely another red flag to be on the lookout for. The next one, I've had this happen to me on dates before, and probably should have been a deal breaker, but it wasn't at that time, is when your date talks down to you in a condescending and patronizing way. So the article states that if your date is criticizing you about the fact that you're still in school or living with your parents, or they question your intelligence or make comments about your decision making in life, they're basically treating you as incompetent and incapable. And that's definitely not someone that you want to continue dating. And another low-key sign of abusive behavior is manipulation. So you can see this in the form of if your date is saying like, we're having a good time, right? And making sure that you are on the same page as them. Or saying things like, it's so obvious that you're into me, so I'm going to take you out again next Friday. Instead of actually asking you, they're just assuming that you're going to say yes and kind of manipulating you into saying yes. So definitely keep a lookout for those red flags as well. There's a lot more in this article. I'm just kind of picking the ones that speak to me the most, but I will also put the links in the show notes if you want to read more. Bottom line from that section is anyone who makes you feel in fear, whether that be leaving or rejecting a relationship, is definitely something that you need to nip in the bud right away and end it. And finally, another low-key red flag on a first date is if they're either too private or secretive or too open. So each side of the spectrum is a low-key red flag. The article states that if it's painfully difficult to get your date to talk or elaborate or open up or even just reciprocate the conversation, that could be a huge clue that they have a lot to hide and they're trying to keep it secretive. But please don't confuse that with someone that's introverted or shy. Again, trust your intuition. If you feel like they're keeping things from you or being secretive, just trust that intuition. The same works for the other way around. If someone is too eager to tell you every detail of their life and literally has no filter, don't be fooled by this being someone who wears their heart on their sleeve. Because what it could mean is that these types of people actually just have no personal boundaries, and that might not be a characteristic that you would want to date yourself. All in all, what this article is telling you is that if your date says, does, thinks, feels, believes, behaves, or treats you in a way that kind of sets you off or kind of puts a weird feeling in your stomach, take it for what it is. Don't second guess your emotions. Trust your gut intuition. And because what your gut is telling you is that what just happened is something that you're not going to accept or tolerate, and it is compromising with your worth. So listen to it loud and clear, and just trust that you know yourself best within the dating world. So there you have it. There are some dating app red flags, some first date questions that you can ask to get the conversation started, and also when you're on the date, some red flags to also look out for. I hope this type of episode was good to mix it up, especially for listeners who are here all the time. Like I said at the beginning, I want to mix it up, give some more lighthearted things, some heavier topics, because all in all, the goal of this podcast is to just give you a sense that so many people around you are very similar to yourself and going through similar things in life. So I hope my commentary on them and some of the stories that I shared reminded you of times in your life that you've gone through as well. And I hope some of the articles gave you some good tips to take into the dating world with you, or even just in your relationships. Maybe you're currently dating someone, maybe it's new. So hopefully these articles with all of their red flags reminded you of scenarios that you don't need to put up with. If your gut is telling you something that doesn't align with you, there are so many more other people in the world. So don't get caught up in one person or one situation if they're not treating you well. I know even in my experience, it's sometimes so hard to remind yourself that there are so many other people out there that would be so happy and so grateful to be dating you. So if someone is currently treating you terribly, just remind yourself that you are worthy of so much more, and to start taking the steps to get out of the relationship that you're in and to open yourself up to something even better. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Come back next week for another interview with one of our fantastic guests. Have a great week. Enjoy your day. And if there's any other topics that you want me to talk about more, just send me a message.